Do you have investment properties you're considering selling and would like to learn how to defer the tax consequences? Then you need to call Equity Advantage and learn about a 1031 exchange. A 1031 exchange is a powerful investment tool. It enables you to keep a property's equity intact when it's used to acquire like-kind replacement property of equal or greater value and equity, even if you recently acquired the property. For over 30 years, Equity Advantage has been providing investors solutions for deferring taxes and maximizing the value of investments through a 1031 exchange. At Equity Advantage, we don't sell investments, but rather provide the tax deferment tools and expertise to facilitate their sale and transfer. Learn more by going to 1031exchange.com. or Google YouTube Equity Advantage for in-depth videos. Listen, you've worked hard for the money in your investments. Equity Advantage works hard to keep it yours.
Learn more about 1031 exchanges and Equity Advantage at 1031exchange.com. That's 1031exchange.com.
Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a Tuesday, and Joe Biden says that he is proud of his son, Hunter Biden. That's right, the same Hunter Biden who's going to plead guilty to tax charges that ordinarily would send ordinary Americans off to prison for 2 to 3 years. Tax charges that, in Hunter Biden's case, is going to receive no prison time. He is going to get probation only. And then there's the gun charge. The one where he walked into a store to buy a gun, and he filled out that Form 4473, the same form that a lot of us have filled out, in my case, dozens of times, and signed your name to it, knowing that if you signed your name to anything on that form that was a lie, that you could go to prison for 5 years. And what does Hunter Biden get? A slap on the wrist. No jail time at all, no prison time, and no felony conviction. And Joe Biden is proud of his son. He's so proud of what he did. The same son that he says he never talked business with, that he never met with the business associates of Hunter Biden. And why would he? He's the capo of the Biden crime family. And what happens? Prosecutors say, oh, there's a $10 million bribery scheme that involves Joe Biden. We're not even going to look at that. And are we going to send Hunter Biden off to prison? No. Now, their decision is not final. The final decision has to be made by a federal judge. But what have the prosecutors recommended? Even though they're conflicted as all get out, because you've got Joe Biden, whose attorney general is named by Joe Biden, who runs the Department of Justice, and the DOJ says, we don't think the judge should give him any time behind bars. We don't think the judge should take a guilty plea to a felony crime, even though it appears that he committed both tax crimes and at least one gun crime. No consequences because he's Joe Biden's son. This has worked out so well for Hunter Biden. And Joe and Jill Biden, they're trying to frame Hunter Biden as the victim in all of this. This is this guy who's literally made millions of dollars. He made millions in Ukraine. He made millions from the widow of the former mayor of Moscow. He made millions of dollars in communist China. And Joe Biden never once talked to his son, so he claims, about business. And what do? They release a statement, Joe Biden and Jill Biden. And you and I both know Joe Biden is just as guilty as his son, if not more so. Here's the statement. The president and the first lady love their son and support him as he continues to rebuild his life. Because after all, the victim is not the American public. They also said we have no further comment. Joe, I'll tell you what, I don't think that's going to hold up for you. I think that if the reporters out there are actually doing their jobs, they're going to ask you questions about this until November of next year. And you deserve to afford American citizens an answer to those questions. What was your involvement in the millions of dollars that Hunter Biden got and complained about how he had to share a large amount of it with the big guy, that he was paying the bills for the family, which includes Jill Biden and Joe Biden and Jim Biden and a number of other Bidens? All of that. And Hunter Biden gets almost no consequences at all. Welcome to the Lars Larson Show. If you want to join the best conversation in talk journalism, it's right here every day at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. So Hunter Biden gets a sweetheart deal. How many other Americans would expect the same kind of treatment from the U.S. Department of Justice? It's not hard at all to find a lot of Americans out there who have done things not nearly so bad as what Hunter Biden did. He pleads guilty to 2 tax crimes with north of $1 million in unpaid taxes in 2017 and 2018. And, you know, I've got a theory about why they bothered to bring charges against him at all. I think the Biden Justice Department would rather have just ignored this until the statute of limitations ran out. But why couldn't they? They couldn't do it because the DOJ is going after Donald Trump. And you can't very well prosecute Trump and then explain and then have an explanation that anybody's going to buy as to why you're not going after Joe Biden's son as well. He won't face any jail time. He'll get 2 years of probation. He'll enter a diversion program because he admitted he illegally bought that gun 5 years ago. Now, remember, his dad constantly rails about how we should enforce America's gun laws and that we should pass new ones, that American citizens who aren't all coked up like his son, who aren't out fathering an illegitimate child like his son, who don't hang out with strippers like his son, people who are not trying to peddle influence on behalf of the Vice President of the United States and now the President of the United States, and they get diversion. I've been hearing from former U.S. attorneys all day now saying, I was a U.S. attorney for a few decades. We never once saw a diversion for an illegal gun purchase. So you've got the collision of these two. See if you can wrap your head around this. A president who wants more laws to make it harder for law-abiding citizens to buy guns. And his own son is will be after he pleads guilty. He will be a gun criminal and a drug criminal. Hunter Biden doesn't have the same laws imposed on him that the rest of us have. And as far as I'm concerned, that erodes trust in the law. I want to take a couple of calls, and then we'll get some other things on the show. In the meantime, if you want to join the best conversation in talk journalism, it's right here every day at 866-HEY-LARS. Let's go to Gary. Hey, Gary, welcome to the program. What's on your mind?
Well, you just pretty well covered just what I wanted to call about.
I try.
They always they want to take our gun rights away and keep making more laws, which they're not enforcing what's on the books already.
True.
And then for this to happen with Hunter, and he gets away with it, and they're not enforcing it, and it's time that they stop doing this that they're doing.
Gary, this is so damaging.
I'm getting real tired of it.
And not just tired of it, Gary, but can I tell you something else that's starting to happen? And you can't point your finger right at it, but see if you find this persuasive. That most of America and most Americans obey the law, not because they're afraid of the consequences. They obey the law because it's the right thing to do. And they understand all the laws apply to all of us equally. The minute you start to show people by practical examples like this, the laws do not apply, then what you're violating is the very thing that John Adams, way back in the day, talked about: a nation of laws, not a nation of men. In a nation of men, if you're in political good favor with those in control, like say you lived in Saudi Arabia and the king of Saudi Arabia loves you, thinks you're the best thing in the world, then you can do no wrong. On the other hand, if you're on the outs with the king of Saudi Arabia, then no matter what you do, you're going to be in trouble. That's a nation of men. America has always been a nation of laws, and now Joe Biden is turning that on its head. Thanks for the call, Gary. I appreciate it. Coming up, Joe Biden sent his Secretary of State Blinken to Beijing to appease Xi Jinping. We're going to talk about that coming up next.
On Taiwan, I reiterated the long-standing U.S. One China policy. That policy has not changed. It's guided by the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 joint communiques, the 6 assurances. We do not support Taiwan independence. We remain opposed to any unilateral changes to the status quo by either side. We continue to expect the peaceful resolution of cross-strait differences.
The peaceful resolution of cross-strait. He's talking about the Formosa Strait that sits between mainland China and the nation of Taiwan, which the United States refuses to recognize as a full nation because they kowtow to the Chinese communists. And I thought we'd talk about that with our friend Frank Gaffney, founder of the Center for Security Policy, author of the new #1 best-selling book on Amazon in its category called The Indictment, prosecuting the Chinese Communist Party and friends for crimes against America, China, and the world. Frank, welcome back.
Thank you, Lars. Good to be with you.
What'd you make of the Secretary of State Anthony Blinken's appeasement tour to Beijing?
Well, it lived up to my expectations, I'm sorry to say, and that was that he would comport himself like a vassal, like a member of a captured elite, like someone who is willingly submitting to the power of the emperor, in this case, Emperor Xi Jinping, the communist dictator of China, in the traditional manner in which those who are submissive conduct themselves, comport themselves, and that is by kowtowing, as they say in China, is prostrating oneself before the emperor. And, this is not just unbecoming an American diplomat and representative. This is betraying our country, I don't think for the first time, unfortunately. And what's so worrying, as you just indicated, Lars, is that this is at a moment when the Chinese Communist Party under Xi Jinping is more and more, transparently seeking to engage in military hostilities against not just Taiwan, but against us as well. Yeah. And I can only believe that the effect of all of this kowtowing is to embolden Xi further, to think he can get away with it, murder, that is, if not cost-free, really basically with impunity.
Because we could say, oh, this is just between China and Taiwan, but as you point out, we've had close calls with ships of the United States and China. We've had close calls between aircraft of the United States and China. And now Anthony Blinken has said, we want a peaceful resolution. What does that mean? That he wants Taiwan to just say, okay, we're part of mainland China. We'll just hook on and become one more little canton of the mainland. Is that what he wants? Is that what he's suggesting? Or is he, because it seems to be suggesting that Taiwanese should not stand up and fight for their own independence?
I think that worse than that is he is signaling to the Taiwanese that we will not help them do that. And he mentioned in passing that there is this thing called the Taiwan Relations Act,
yep,
which indicates that we will help them do that. And yet he went through this, series of sixes of that and, two of this and other Chinese formulations for the kind of one China policy that we, to I think, our lasting ignominy, adopted years ago. And at this moment in time, it couldn't be other than just an invitation to Xi to act more aggressively towards Taiwan and quite possibly to, blockade the place for starters and perhaps actually invade it. And if we've learned nothing from Ukraine, it is that you want to deter these sorts of things rather than contend with the consequences of failing to do so. And I fear that's what's now in prospect.
It's funny because that you mentioned that, Frank, because before, in the lead up to Russia's entry into Ukraine, Joe Biden didn't say much of anything. And then, as it seemed inevitable that they were going to move into Ukraine, then he began to talk tough. But if he had actually told Russia, 12 months out, if you're putting troops on their border, we're going to start sending arms to Ukraine, and we're going to make them capable of resisting you, you're right. It might have deterred the Russians, but it was almost as though he wanted to give them a green light all the way up to that ridiculous statement where he said, well, if it's only a small incursion, then, maybe we won't do much of anything at all. So he green lighted them all the way up to the point where the Russians went in, and then he starts talking tough at that point.
Well, then he starts talking tough more to the point, but only really after Zelensky says, no, I'm not going to take your offer to extricate me. We're going to fight. And at that point, I think he was kind of shamed into acting, and unfortunately acting despite all of the money and stuff, the weapon systems that are promised and in the pipeline and sent that way and so on. I think it's been too little too late. And again, the other person, of course, who greenlighted the invasion of Ukraine was Xi Jinping, who, when he and Vladimir Putin met in Beijing, clearly said, yeah, go there, fine. That's just as long as you don't do it in the midst of we call it genocide games, the Olympics. And that was a further indication that he believes that under Joe Biden, aggression can be undertaken, as I say, more or less without cost, and certainly to the benefit of the nations involved. If you want that territory, seize it. And that's exactly the wrong message to be sending to a guy like Xi, most especially.
Well, and by the way, I've seen some more reports recently that Ukraine and Russia had a peace deal that was about ready to be put in place, and then Boris Johnson rolls in and says, "No, we're not going to take the deal. Putin will screw you. He'll not honor the deal." And they pretty well scotched it at that point. But is this being deliberately set up to set up what happened there, to set up what's going to happen or appears to be ready to happen in Taiwan?
Well, I have a concern that what is being set up and may have been, in fact, been communicated in the 7 hours of, struggle session, I think, that Blinken was subjected to by the top Chinese diplomat. The idea basically is that there is going to be an invasion or a seizure of Taiwan in some form or fashion. And that what they're going to say to the United States, I think, is, those advanced chips that are manufactured in Taiwan, we'll guarantee you access to those after we seize the place, provided you don't intervene. And I think that may be an offer that old Joe Biden will be perfectly prepared to accept. Forget about, coming to the rescue of Taiwan. We'll claim that as long as we get access to the chips, it doesn't matter. And shame on us, and most especially him, if it plays out that way.
Well, and not only that, Frank, but think about this. Almost all our weapon systems run on chips. And if you say, oh, but we're buying the chips for those from where? Where do you buy them from that keeps you out from under Beijing's umbrella?
Well, and that's going to be the point, is Biden will simply say, look, we have no choice. They produce an awful lot of chips as things stand right now in mainland China, thanks in part to investments the Taiwanese foolishly made there over the years.
Wow.
But if they've got the advanced ones, sayonara, as they say in Japan.
And maybe we should start referring to it as the Vichy government of Joe Biden and Anthony Blinken, and, of course, the inimitable Kamala Harris. Frank Gaffney, the founder of the Center for Security Policy in Washington, D.C. Frank, thank you very much. Coming up, it looks like China, Korea, and Japan didn't take too kindly to having their childhood memories of the Little Mermaid trampled on by left-wing politics. Is it racism in Hollywood, or just Disney and their scapegoat? Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. I want to get to that story about Hollywood here in just a moment, about the flop of The Little Mermaid in one of the biggest potential markets in the world, and that is China. But let me get to that in just a moment, because it appears that Hollywood is trying to say, well, it's not because our film was full of all kinds of woke nonsense, which they put into the new Little Mermaid movie, No, it's because the Chinese are a bunch of anti-black racists. But I'll get to that in a moment. Let's go to Paul in the great Commonwealth of Virginia. And if you want to jump in, it's 866-439-5277. Paul, what's on your mind?
Hi, Lars. When you apply for a gun, you have to make an application, as you know.
Yep.
Which Hunter allegedly lied on. It has to go to the authorities and has to be approved before they give him the gun. So if they gave him the gun, which I don't know, or
they did
they not, perhaps, so I'm saying, how did that happen? How did the lie
Well,
get
I
passed?
can tell you how it happened, Paul. To my knowledge, Hunter Biden, until now, well, even today, he could say, I don't have any drug convictions on my record. So if you put on the form, it asks you whether or not you're a user of illegal drugs, which much to the consternation of people in states where marijuana is legal. I don't like marijuana. I don't like that it's legal, but it is. At the state level, they've actually asked the ATF, does that count as an illegal drug? And they said, it sure does, because pot is still illegal under federal law. But if Hunter Biden puts down that he's not a user of illegal drugs, and they look at his background, and he has no convictions for use of illegal drugs. He did get kicked out of the Navy for using cocaine, but to my knowledge, he doesn't have a single drug conviction in his record. So how would they check his statement that he's not a user of illegal drugs?
Got it. Okay.
If it's not, I mean, it'd be like this. Do you occasionally speed in your car?
Well, on rare occasions, yeah.
Okay, and have you received a speeding ticket recently?
No, I have not.
How long has it been since you got a speeding ticket?
About 10 years ago.
10 years. So if they said, are you in the habit of violating the speed limit in your car? Your friends might all say, yeah, Paul's got a lead foot. He blows past the speed limit all the time. But if the cops look at your record and say, this guy hasn't had a speeding ticket in 10 years, so he's clearly not somebody who speeds. If you're going off the official record. If you're going off the official record, Hunter Biden is as pure as the driven snow. And yes, the pun was intended there, that the guy had snow up his nose all the time, but there's nothing in his record. So, that's the difference. But that's why they ask you, are you a user of illegal narcotics? Because what they know is that when you sign your name to the bottom, you might say, I don't have any drug convictions, but it doesn't ask you, do you have any drug convictions? It says, are you a user of illegal drugs? And you say, well, I can lie on the form. You say, yes, you can, but you're warned right at the bottom of the form, if you lie on the form and sign your name to it, you just committed a federal felony for which punishment by up to 5 years in federal prison is one of the alternatives. So in some ways, it's a better way of checking. Because, yes, somebody could lie on it, but if you get caught telling the lie and you find out, yeah, this guy uses illegal drugs all the time, but he lied on the Form 4473, which I've filled out at least a few dozen times, then you're guilty of a federal felony and you go to prison. Except they just told the whole system, they told everybody in America, the law doesn't apply to people like Hunter Biden.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense to me as well. And Paul, what makes it even more maddening to me, and thank you for the phone call, is that when you tell people that, and then Joe Biden comes out with Jill Biden, and they release a statement in which it appears that they're trying to cast their son as a victim in all of this, it's even more outrageous because, oh, poor Hunter Biden, he's just trying to get on with his life. I mean, this guy's a sleazeball all day long. He goes out and fathers a child by a stripper. The mother of the child has demanded that he pay child support, which apparently he does have to pay child support. He denied the existence of the child until he was forced by the courts to take a paternity test that proved absolutely he is the father of that child. So now he has to pay child support, and both he and his dad effectively ignore the kid. Now, you might think, well, that's not criminal. No, it's not criminal. But if somebody was running for public office and you knew that they had fathered a child and they pay the money for the kid, but they never have any contact with the kid, What would you make of that? I would say that's a sleazeball who has no business holding any kind of public office in America. But that's just my opinion as an individual voter. Let's go to Todd. Hey, Todd, welcome to the Lars Larson Show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Lars. I was thinking about the firearms form that you have to fill out to buy a weapon. And one of the questions on there is, have you been dishonorably discharged from the military? And if Hunter Biden was kicked out for cocaine, that would automatically make it dishonorable, wouldn't it? I'm not sure.
I think there are, I'm not military in my background. I honor those who are, with the exception of Hunter Biden. I can't recall whether he got, because there are several categories. You can be discharged, you can be court-martialed, you can be dishonorably discharged, you can be, and I think there's a category called less than. Okay. So my smart producer, executive producer, Donovan Sargent, looked it up quickly. He was discharged through administrative procedures. So he managed to, through an administrative procedure, by avoiding a dishonorable discharge. So he probably was able to answer that one honestly. So that's the bottom line on that, Todd. Does that make sense?
It does. I just wonder if he pulled any strings to get that, because
come on.
I know
you think he wouldn't? I mean, it's almost like anything involving Hunter Biden has to have some sleaze attached to it. The guy makes these crazy paintings and sells them to people for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and nobody thinks the artwork is worth that, nor do they think his name is. But they want to impress his daddy, and they want to put some money in Hunter's pocket so he can pay his child support and live the kind of lifestyle he's been able to live. No, I think he once admitted in an interview, he was asked, did you get the job on the board of directors of Burisma because your dad? He said, and I think there's some truth to this, Todd. He said, well, as Hunter Biden, I don't think, I can paraphrase what he said. He said, I don't think I've been able to get a job in my lifetime that didn't have something to do with my dad. Now, Todd, I can understand why people who are the kids of celebrities probably would have to say that, except that you know that some of them actually take great pains. I think Joe Hill is a good example of that. He's Stephen King's son. Did he go out and get a great situation and a job because he said, because I'm Stephen King's son? No, he did otherwise. Thank you very much for the call. Hey, by the way, what if you could turn back the clock and help your dog play like a puppy again, no matter what the age? That's what Dr. Marty Pets does with Nature's Blend, because your dog needs a diet full of real cuts of meat, similar to what they'd eat in the wild. Dogs go bonkers for Dr. Marty's Pets Nature's Blend. When given the choice between Nature's Blend and the giant online retailer's #1 dry dog food, a study shows 29 out of 30 dogs choose Nature's Blend first. And I'll tell you what, Sir Winston Churchill, my Bernese Mountain Dog, he loves Nature's Blend, and he does prefer it over everything else. Doesn't want to eat anything else. Give your dog a food they'll love and help support their youthful energy, healthy skin, easy digestion, and happy full life. For a limited time, claim 54% off Nature's Blend and get a free pack of premium dog treats from Dr. Marty Pets. Go to drmartypets.com/pets or text PETS, PETS, to 511-511. That's PETS to 511-511. Study available on request. Message and data rates may apply. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. We're all watching the economy because I think a lot of us do not wish for bad things to happen, but we understand that there are bad things out there that may just happen no matter what because of the situation in the marketplace. You've got really bad things. We told you a couple of weeks ago that in downtown San Francisco, the absolute destruction of that city is underway. So much so that 2 of the top 4 hotels in the entire city have gone, basically, the owners have handed the keys back to the bank and said, we can't make the payments anymore, and they let them go. And I asked you at the time we told you about that development, we said, hey, how bad does it have to be before a company that owns a very, very expensive, hundreds of millions of dollars wrapped up in a piece of real estate, and you hand the keys back to the bank? Well, it has to be pretty bad. But my next question at the time was, And who's going to walk into that kind of environment in San Francisco and buy that hotel and try to operate it in the same conditions that caused its previous owners to abandon it? And there are some bad possible explanations or possible answers to that question. I thought we'd talk about it with Mark Jaffe, who's a scholar at the Cato Institute. Mark, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Lars.
I think that there are times where you were absolutely right in what you've written, and that is we tend to focus on residential real estate because for the most part, all of us live in homes. And we say, well, what's happening to residential real estate? But commercial real estate is something that we ought to be watching because it's a good indication of where our economy is going, isn't it?
Definitely. And there's really been a lot of negative pressure on commercial real estate prices, especially offices and retail. For a couple of years now, retail actually even going back before the pandemic. So it is an important part of our economy and something, I hope more people become aware of.
Okay, so what happens? I mean, I posed the question when we talked, I think it was 2 weeks ago, about this major investment company that was handing the keys back. I don't know if they literally hand the keys to the hotel back to the bank, but they basically say to the bank, we can't make the mortgage payments on this anymore. We're giving it back to you. And now the bank has to do something with that piece of real estate because in most cases, if a loan becomes non-performing, it actually goes from one side of the books to the other side. It goes from an asset, a performing loan, to a non-asset. It has a doubled effect on the bank's books, on the bank's bottom line. What do they do, and where are we headed, and what do we need to do to head it off?
Right. Well, in the San Francisco case, there's actually another wrinkle. The other side of this transaction is not, in fact, a bank. It's a commercial mortgage-backed security, or CMBS, which is held by a bunch of investors that really don't know a lot about running hotels. So they usually, get experts to represent them. And, in this case, there will be somebody who is agreeable to this group of investors who will take over and manage the property.
But if the conditions were so bad that the previous owners who handed it back say, we can't afford to make the payments, I don't think any company does that, very, very easily. They may say, we don't want to do that. We're giving up what equity we might have should we turn the marketplace around. So who's going to be persuaded to come in and take that over? And am I right to be concerned that the government might just do it and do what they've done in places like New York and say, well, we're going to turn this into a massive piece of housing for either homeless, drug addicts, illegal aliens, or a mix?
I think we have a ways to go before we get there. So let's understand that before 2020, these two hotels, and they have a total of 2,925 rooms, were worth about $1.56 billion, according to the appraiser and the rating agencies. So they took out a $725 million mortgage on it, which seems pretty safe. That's less than a 50% loan-to-value ratio.
Yep.
Now, it looks like the owner has decided that these hotels are worth less than $725 million. So let's say they're worth 200 or 300 or 400 million. That means that the investors are going to take a big haircut, but it's still going to make sense for somebody to operate this as a private hotel rather than as public housing or a homeless shelter.
Another piece that you wrote about was vacant urban office space, and you said those things are going for 20 cents on the dollar. Talk about that if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, in San Francisco, we have a commercial vacancy rate of about 30%, and that impacts properties in an uneven way. So some properties are almost completely vacant, and it's really hard to find a landlord who's going to take the risk that they'll buy this and then in a few years they'll be able to fill up the property. So they really need to get a big haircut on the previous values of these properties. So we did see one on California Street, which is really one of the major financial streets in San Francisco, go for about 20 to 25 cents on the dollar, where the dollar refers to what it was worth just 3 or 4 years ago.
All right. And when the person takes over that kind of distressed property, are they inclined to pour any great amount of money into it? Because I would imagine that those big buildings cost a lot to maintain, even if you're maintaining them empty. And yet if you're buying it on the cheap, Are you going to pour a lot of money into making sure that it stays the kind of quality office space that it was? If you don't have any tenants to pay the bill?
Yeah, I think that's a major concern. These properties could definitely filter down because, right, it's not worth a lot to invest in a vacant building. You're not really receiving any revenue from it. You're having to pay property tax and utilities and so forth. So any additional investment, that's going to be really problematic.
Yeah, no doubt. Mark, keep writing it at the Cato Institute. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. That's Mark Jaffe. He's one of the writers and a scholar at the Cato Institute, which is a libertarian free market kind of institution, and we're glad to have his insights. Hey, if you're buying that name brand CBD right now, write down this website, genericcbd.com. That's genericcbd.com. Make the switch to generic and save today. Save big time, about 75%. Their products are fantastic. And on a side note, they also sell a muscle and joint cream that's out of this world. We love generic CBD. It retails for about $100. It's on sale right now for $39.95. But you can try it out free of charge. That's right, just pay $2.95 for the shipping. This penetrating cream melts right into your muscles and your joints, your knees, your elbows, and your lower back. You won't believe how fast it goes to work. Plus, it doubles as one of the best moisturizers you've ever tried. Try it out for yourself. You'll love it. And don't worry, it's not a subscription. Get your free sample at genericcbd.com and get that sample on its way right now. See what this amazing CBD cream can do for you. Get your free sample at genericcbd.com. That's genericcbd.com. These products and statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease or illness. And you're listening to The Lars Larson Show. So tell Alexa to play The Lars Larson Show. Are you part of the Great Resignation, that mass exodus of people who are leaving their jobs to start something new? Then something you need to consider is what to do with your company 401k. Rather than just rolling it over, consider opening a truly self-directed IRA. With a self-directed IRA, a truly self-directed IRA, your retirement portfolio can include real estate, precious metals, cryptocurrency, notes, loans, a new business, and traditional equities like stocks and bonds. You can make any investment the law allows with a truly self-directed retirement account. Listen, you probably have questions, so why not take the time to get the answers? Start with going to IRAadvantage.com. Then talk to the truly self-directed IRA professionals at IRA Advantage.
Would you like to learn more about truly self-directed IRAs? Then visit IRAadvantage.com, view our videos, and call IRA Advantage. Let us set up a truly self-directed IRA for you. That's IRAadvantage.com.
Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you on a Tuesday. And if you want to join the best conversation in talk journalism, it happens right here every day at 866-HEY-LARS. And while Hunter Biden's deal was being cut, the one we've been talking about today, the one where he gets no prison time for things that normally send people to prison, like cheating on your taxes, like $1.2 million in tax evasion, while that's going on, what's the IRS doing? It's taking part in a raid in Great Falls, Montana. And let me tell you about that, a raid on a gun store. Because from Joe Biden's point of view, because he runs the ATF and he runs the IRS, they are executive branch agencies. Apparently, it's okay for the president's son to commit tax crimes. It's okay for the president's son to commit gun crimes, to lie on federal forms and engage in the written form of perjury by perjuring himself and signing a document that is a lie. He told the lie so that he could buy a gun illegally. He did all that, and he gets almost nothing in the way of punishment whatsoever. In a moment, I'll tell you all about that raid in Great Falls, Montana. But first, welcome to the Lars Larson Show. If you want to join that conversation, it's easy. 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. If you happen to be a naysayer, we'll put you right to the head of the line at 866-439-5277. And our Twitter poll, We read a brand new question out of the news of the day. You might have heard about Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, meeting with China's dictator Xi Jinping in Beijing. And what does he say? He says both countries need to stabilize their relations. So while China is attacking the United States, not militarily, not yet, but they are attacking the United States by theft of intellectual property. They are attacking the United States by shipping fentanyl in by the hundreds and hundreds of pounds made in China and brought into the United States and killing more than 100,000 Americans every single year. What does Anthony Blinken do? Does he go to China and say, you're going to have to stop stealing our intellectual property or there will be consequences? No, he didn't say that. You're going to have to stop threatening Taiwan. No, he didn't say that. In fact, he said, we do not support Taiwan independence. It's one of the biggest issues that China has going right now. Should America endorse the independence of the freedom-loving country known as Taiwan, or should we support China's ownership of that country? Frankly, I'll vote in favor of independence. The United States, under Joe Biden, has said it wants to let Beijing continue to consider a freedom-loving country like Taiwan as simply a breakaway part of its own country. In any case, glad to get your calls at 866-HEY-LARS. Vote in our Twitter poll at Lars Larson Show and at larslarson.com. Brought to you by AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. AMAC has the conservative values I believe in. I joined the group years ago. You should too. Just go to amac.us or call 888-262-2006. AMAC is better. Better for you and better for America. Now, on Friday, I asked you in our Twitter poll, would you get the COVID booster shot at the recommendation of the untrustworthy FDA? 95% of you said no to that. I join you in the no vote. Only 5% of you said yes. Let's go to Joel in California. Hey, Joel, welcome to the Lars Larson Show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Lars. Hey, so you've been talking a lot about gun laws lately, and you've kind of believe you said that you don't use marijuana and you're not into it.
I don't like it.
Okay. So I guess I just wanted some clarification from you.
Okay.
Because you have this commercial about the CBD.
Yeah.
And you say that you use the CBD.
Yeah, it doesn't have any THC in it. That's the key difference you're looking for. THC in modern pot causes increased psychosis, which I think explains some of the problems we've got in America right now. CBD has no THC in it by law. And in fact, if they catch somebody making CBD and it has THC in it, it doesn't qualify as CBD. It qualifies as a drug. There's a big difference. Do you understand that?
I understand that, but doesn't it come from the same plant?
Well, it does, but let me give you an example. Have you ever eaten an apple?
Sure.
Okay. Do you know the apple seeds contain a poison?
Right.
I can't remember. Is it strychnine or cyanide? I think it's strychnine. So if you eat enough apple seeds, there was a guy a number of years ago who liked dried apple seeds for whatever reason, and he ate a whole bunch of it, and he ended up dying. It is cyanide. It's not strychnine. It's cyanide. So if you say, Lars, if you like apples, you must like cyanide. I'd say, no, I don't like cyanide. And he say, but you eat apples. Apples have cyanide in the seeds. Saying they came from the same plant, and actually, I'm not a biological or botany expert, but I'm willing to bet I could come up with a lot of examples of where there are plants that all of us are used to, and we take as part of our lives. I mean, I eat apples all the time, and yet if you said, Lars, you're eating cyanide. No, I'm not eating cyanide. I'm eating the part of the plant that's okay. So isn't there a difference?
Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to get your clarification on your stance on that.
I think you caught me in some hypocrisy. And see, that's why when and if they federally legalize pot for recreational use, you will not hear me doing any ads for recreational pot. I don't believe in it. And I think it's bad. Okay. I think it causes psychosis. On the other hand, if there's a whiskey manufacturer out there that wants to buy ads on our show, I drink a glass of whiskey now and then. Usually maybe once or twice a week, I'll have a shot of a really good bourbon. If there's a bourbon manufacturer out there, I would be happy to do ads for them. And if you said, well, Lars, that means you believe in getting drunk. I can't remember the last time I got drunk. It must have been 20 years ago. And why? Because my head hurts too much the next day. But would I do ads for a really good bourbon? Absolutely, I do ads for a really good bourbon. By the way, are you a small business owner? Thank you, Joel. Are you a small business owner who could use a few $100,000 and who couldn't? Employee retention tax credits are an incredible opportunity for you. Call the experts at Get My Funds. They've been around since the beginning of the pandemic, and they've already helped out about 1,500 small business owners. And they got about $300 million in funding. And they know what they're doing. They have a team of CPAs that specialize in filing for those tax credits. And they're with you every step of the way, even in the event of an audit. They stand behind their work with an audit safeguard. If you retained 5 or more W-2 employees during COVID, and even if you already received the PPP, you need to call Get My Funds now at 800-535-2950. It's not a grant, it's not a loan, it's a tax refund. And there are no upfront fees to find out if you qualify. Go with a team you can trust at Get My Funds, 800-535-2950, or getmyfunds.com. That's getmyfunds.com. Glad to be with you on a Tuesday. Always glad to take your phone calls and emails. And yes, we're keeping an eye on that missing submarine with 3 rich people on board, but apparently most of the media is not paying much attention at all to a ship that sank with 750 people on board, but they weren't billionaires, so apparently the media doesn't care. Coming up, we'll talk about molecular engineering. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. You've heard me talk about GMO crops before. I don't have an inherent problem with GE or GMO crops. I know that there can be abuses of it. I know that there also can be abuses of hybridization of crops, which has been going on for a long, long time. And the guy who knows that best is our friend Dr. Henry Miller, medical doctor, molecular biologist. He's at the American Council on Science and Health. He was founding director of the FDA's Office of Biotechnology. Doc, welcome back.
Great to be with you, Lars. Thank you.
You wrote about genetic engineering recently, and you pointed out this has been going on for a lot longer than people might think.
Absolutely. We've been modifying the genetic complement, the genes of plants in particular, and also microorganisms, since the invention of something called agriculture. That's how we've gotten improved varieties of all sorts of things. Wheat and maize in ancient times, maize being converted into modern crops that we call corn, and even microorganisms. There are depictions on Egyptian friezes of their using various yeasts that they've selected carefully and modified through selection to produce alcoholic beverages. So this has been around for a very, very long time. And the important thing is that there's a seamless continuum of techniques that have been used since ancient times through today to create these modifications for yield or taste or other desirable characteristics.
I mean, so anybody who was raising, say, livestock, whether it was back in the day or more recently, would say, I'm going to take a good-sized bull and breed it with the right cows, cows that will produce other big cows or bulls, and you're going to do that over and over again until you get a herd of a particular kind of cow that does well in the circumstances you're in and produces the meat you're trying to get or the milk, right?
Exactly. And you can even do interspecies breeding. So if you cross a cow with a buffalo, you get something called a beefalo, which years ago I used to buy at the butchers in Washington, but it was never very popular, so I don't think it's around anymore. But that's different species being crossbred, and we do that with plants as well. So a nectarine is a mutant peach, and a tangelo is a pomelo and something else, orange cross. And so it's not mysterious, but activists like to pretend that it is. that it's something we don't have experience with and we're not certain about the safety of, and so on.
But they don't use examples like that. They're not saying, well, you don't want to breed beef that's better beef. And what I reply back to them is, I understand the history of the tomato. If you go back, I don't know if you have to go back 500 years or 1,000 years, but the tomato way back in the day was not a very attractive fruit, and it is a fruit, but it was not very attractive. It is not very tasty. But the stuff I want to put on a sandwich, on a hamburger, is very tasty and very good because of exactly what you're talking about.
Exactly, and as you know, there are different varieties of tomatoes for different purposes. So canning tomatoes, tomatoes used for juice, are different from those that we eat and love in the summertime on a hamburger.
Well, it's interesting, Doc, that people have a different definition of natural. Because you said, well, those are natural because they're talking about hybridization, where somebody who's growing tomatoes said, I'm going to keep growing this kind of tomato till I get to the variety that I'm looking for. And it might take, I've actually seen some universities where they say, hey, we came up with a new tomato and it took us 20 years to be able to hybridize to this one. They say, well, that's natural. Well, it's not natural because if you're trying to hybridize that tomato, you throw out the ones that didn't quite make it, and you concentrate them toward the one you want. Just like if you were raising greyhound dogs for racing, you throw out the runts, the ones that are short or not very fast, and you keep breeding the ones that are fast together until you get the fastest dog you want, or the fastest horse.
Exactly, and over the years, I've had the privilege to go to a couple of plant breeding institutions where they do tastings for you of all sorts of brand new, innovative varieties. So the International Rice Research Institute, as the name suggests, does rice breeding. And that's in the Philippines, Los Baños, Philippines. And there are all sorts of interesting rice with different textures and different flavors. And I once went to a conference at the University of California, Davis, not too far from San Francisco. And there was a tomato tasting sponsored by their tomato breeding group, headed by a very, very wonderful, charismatic, elderly plant scientist named Charlie Ricks. And again, the tomatoes were incredible, different textures, different characteristics. And I want to pick up one point that you made, that early varieties, early versions of many of the plants and of the fruits and vegetables we eat today were extremely unpalatable and ugly.
Well, would maize be an example of that?
Absolutely. Maize began as a weed-like plant called teosinte that still grows in Mexico, and it looks like the kind of thing that your gardener or you pluck out of your lawn. I mean, there are no visible kernels, and the yields would be horrendous if you tried to eat them or feed them to livestock. But one of the really ugliest is watermelon, which began as a small grapefruit-sized fruit with huge seeds, and that wasn't sweet. So you wonder how people knew, how plant breeders, early plant breeders called farmers, knew that they could improve it to the level that we enjoy today.
Well, I mean, were they just watching for the oddball plants that came out? In other words, if you grew a bunch of what were then watermelons and they were the size of a grapefruit, you said, we're going to get the ones that are bigger, we're going to get the ones that have smaller seeds, and we're just going to keep hybridizing those. Is that basically the approach they took?
Exactly, because that's all they had to work with.
So why can't we convince people that as new techniques come up for hybridization, that they aren't willing to adopt them? And why are people so against GMO?
Well, remember Deep Throat's admonition, follow the money. And groups like Greenpeace and U.S. Right to Know and various similar groups raise money by opposing modern technology and promulgating fears about them, about new technologies. So it's true of nuclear, it's true of genetic engineering, it's true of modern, very safe, very effective pesticides, and that's just what these evildoers do.
Well, and it's funny, too, because the first plant patents, weren't they some of the first patents ever in America, and that they were in the late 1700s? So when I hear people complain, well, the GMO companies just want you to buy their seed. Well, human beings have been selling seed, saying, you want some really beautiful tulips? You'll get the bulbs from me. You want some really beautiful corn? You'll buy the seed from me. And they did that to make money, which is some of follow the money. But they said, if you want to grow the corn you've always grown, go ahead. But your neighbor's growing the other stuff, and that pays a whole lot better. Dr. Henry Miller is at the American Council on Science and Health. He is the Glenn Swagger Distinguished Fellow there at ACSH. He's also a doctor and a molecular biologist. Dr. Miller, it's a pleasure to have you on the program. Coming up in a moment, the Pentagon is reportedly monitoring American social media accounts for comments that are negative toward military generals. With all the problems America has right now, is that one of the things they really want to focus their time and attention on? We'll get to that and your phone calls and emails. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show, and I'm glad to get to your calls here in just a moment. This is kind of stunning. You've got the U.S. military that's being run into the ground by the Biden administration. They're doing it through woke policies. They're doing it by not doing the things they need to do in terms of funding to make the Pentagon what it needs to be, which is a force to defend the United States of America. And now we find out from Breitbart, the U.S. Army's Protective Services Battalion, otherwise known as the PSB, that is the Defense Department's equivalent to the Secret Service, is now monitoring social media to find out if anybody has posted negative comments about the country's highest-ranking officers. I'll tell you more details of that story in a moment. But if you want to join what we call the best conversation in talk journalism, it's right here at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. Turns out that The Intercept, which is another journalism organization, and Breitbart is citing their work, the PSB's remit includes protecting officers from embarrassment, in addition to more pressing threats like kidnapping and assassination. An Army procurement document from last year obtained by The Intercept shows that the PSB now monitors social media for negative sentiment about officers under its protection as well for direct, indirect, and veiled threats. According to the report, the Army intends not just to monitor platforms on social media for negative sentiment, but also to pinpoint the location of the posters. The Army's new toolkit goes far beyond social media surveillance of the kind offered by private companies like DataMiner, which helps police and military agencies detect perceived threats by scraping social media timelines and chat rooms for various kinds of keywords. Instead, the PSB investigators seemingly combine social media data with a broad variety of public and non-public information, all of it accessible through what's called a universal search selector. Those sources of information include what they call signal-rich discussions from illicit threat actor communities and access to around-the-clock conversations, public research, radio stations, I hope it's not ours, news outlets, personal records, hacked information, webcams, and get this, cell phone location data. Yeah, can be used for good or bad. We've talked about it before. The document mentions the use of what's called geofence data as well, which is a practice where an investigator draws a shape on a digital map to focus their surveillance in a particular area. While app-based smartphone tracking is a potent surveillance technique, it remains unclear how exactly the data might actually be used to unmask threats on social media. So consider that. The Pentagon is watching not just what our enemies or our adversaries overseas are doing, they're watching what's going on inside the United States of America. as an American citizen who's happy to pay his taxes to support the U.S. military, I'm not very happy about that. Our Twitter poll today, and you can find the question at Lars Larson Show and at LarsLarson.com. Should America endorse the independence of Taiwan or China's ownership of that country? I would go for independence. You can vote in the Twitter poll at Lars Larson Show and consider what happened when America's Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, who works for Joe Biden, he goes to China to visit with Xi Jinping. Now, the last time he planned to go to China, the trip was canceled. And why? Because China was in the middle of flying spy balloons over our country that Joe Biden tried to ignore and finally shot down, but only after those spy balloons had overflown, or at least one of them had overflown the entire country, including military bases, and sent data back in real time to Beijing. And then we finally shot it down. So Anthony Blinken goes to Beijing. He talks to Xi Jinping. Does he demand to know why China is imprisoning 3 million slaves in its country, slaves who are often used to make products that are then sold in the United States? We have a law against that, but apparently we don't enforce it. Why is China allowing the manufacture of fentanyl, which is then shipped out of China, goes through Mexico, comes into the United States, and kills more than 100,000 people every year? Why is it that Chinese ships and airplanes have had close calls with our ships and our airplanes? And what about Taiwan? Taiwan is its own country. Taiwan is a self-governing country that is a freedom-loving country. Mainland China is a communist dictatorship. And who does the United States support? Well, Anthony Blinken makes it a point to say we do not support Taiwan independence. Now, Joe Biden has previously said that he believes if there is an attack, that the United States would defend Taiwan. So who's actually calling the shots in Joe Biden's White House? Is it Joe Biden or is it the Chinese communists who are actually pulling his strings? Today's Twitter poll can be found at Lars Larson Show and at LarsLarson.com. Brought to you by AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. AMAC has the conservative values I believe in. I joined the group. You should too. Just go to amac.us or call 888-262-2006. AMAC is better. Better for you and better for America. Last Friday, I asked you this Twitter poll question: would you get the COVID booster shot at the recommendation of the FDA? Now, I've told you, just because I always disclose if I have a dog in the fight, I decided the jab, the mRNA shot, was not worth it for me. My wife made the same decision. We haven't done any of the boosters, and we've been perfectly all right. So now the FDA is pushing people to go get the COVID boosters. Apparently, they want to make sure that all those pharmaceutical companies don't get stuck with a bunch of expiring vaccines from which they plan to make millions of dollars. 95% of you joined me in a no vote and said, no, I'm not going to get the COVID booster shot just because the FDA says I should. And by the way, I saw a note from one of my emailers today who said, Lars, what happened to all those really dangerous variants on SARS-CoV-2? Remember about a year ago, they were telling us, the medical authorities were telling us, why there are all these dangerous variants that are coming, and we're going to be in big trouble in a year, or this fall, or next summer, or whenever. Where have all those variants gone? They seem to have gone away, although maybe the Biden administration has just put them in storage until we get close to another election, because after all, the pandemic works out very, very well for the folks in the Biden administration. It has before, and it will again. Today's Twitter poll is brought to you by AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. AMAC has the conservative values I believe in. I join. You should too. Just go to amac.us or call 888-262-2006. AMAC is better. Better for you and better for America. I want to point something out to you. Today marks 1 month since Chicago's brand new mayor, Brandon Johnson, entered office. He commemorated the milestone on Twitter with a thread detailing what he's focused on so far. Notably, there was only one mention of public safety, And it wasn't even a reference to a specific policy. That's significant because new data shows that Mayor Brandon Johnson of Chicago has presided over a 38% increase, a spike in crime in his first month compared to the same period of last year. And that's saying something. Leading doctors are now concluding that the death of legendary Australian cricketer Shane Warne was likely precipitated by the COVID mRNA vaccine that he had taken about 9 months prior to his sudden cardiac death. His postmortem findings reveal the coronary atherosclerosis, and they're saying it was the vaccine that did it to him. And one thought, President Joe Biden may not be aware of what year it is. Biden showed up at the Lucy Evans Baylands Nature Center in Palo Alto, California, and he made an odd proclamation. He said, I've committed that by 2020, we will have conserved 30% of the land and water the United States has jurisdiction of. Somebody should let Joe know that was about 3 years ago, Joe. Back in a moment. Glad to get your calls. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you on a Tuesday. And if you want to jump into the conversation, it's 866-HEY-LARS. Send emails to talk@larslarson.com. Vote in our Twitter poll. And, of course, naysayers always go to the head of the line. Rabbi Yaakov Menken is managing director at the Coalition for Jewish Values, which is the largest rabbinic public policy organization in the United States. Rabbi, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me back on your program.
Glad to do it. Over the years, I've told people that there are a lot of Arab countries that are, well, if not dismissive of Israel, they literally make kids read geography books that don't have Israel even on the map. It's as though the whole country doesn't exist. And yet, there's a new report out involving Saudi Arabia, which suggests that an awful lot of the negative anti-Semitic sentiment that was in textbooks previously has now been removed. You're still not on the map, but that part has been removed. Should we take heart from that?
Every step that is made in the right direction is a really pretty massive step, given that section of the world and how messed up a lot of the world is, especially that corner of the world. So the fact that these countries are moving even baby steps in the right direction, they're good steps. If they remove anti-Semitism from the textbooks, that's actually huge. If the Palestinian Authority would do that, there would be a lot fewer terror attacks per year in about 20 years when these kids grow up. So it's a really big step, even for a country that's historically been very distant from Israel, to make those steps in the right direction.
Well, I'd agree with you, Rabbi. In fact, this made me, for the first time in probably a couple of decades, think about this. I was born in Taiwan. My mom and dad were in the U.S. Navy, and my dad was serving there at the time, and he believed in books. He bought a copy of the Encyclopedia Britannica, and it had been published in Taiwan, and they said the one that was published in mainland China didn't show Taiwan on the map, but the one that was published in Taiwan did show China or showed Taiwan on the map. And we're still talking about the independence of Taiwan. So I'm with you. I mean, it doesn't entirely change the whole picture, but at least it's a step in the right direction. What else should we be looking at? And why do you think this has happened at this point in Saudi Arabia?
Well, this is clearly an ongoing, these are the results, the reverberations of the Abraham Accords. This is the Trump administration rewriting the map of how peace is done in the Middle East and not letting the Palestinian Authority and its support for terror hold the idea of peace hostage anymore. The United Arab Emirates was first. And of course, the benefits to them in terms of the economic and trade benefits, but even more that the technology benefits and especially the improved medical care for the UAE and also for Bahrain, the countries that are participating in the Abraham Accords. Well, now Saudi Arabia was relatively recently, but in the Biden administration said, we will allow El Al, the Israeli carrier, the airline, to fly over their airspace. And now Oman is allowing that also, which tremendously reduces the time to travel from Israel to India, which are countries that have a very good relationship. So just the fact that they're opening the airspace, like I said, baby steps in that section of the world are very big steps. So for now, for Saudi Arabia to explore the next step forward beyond allowing the transit of their airspace, these are all very big things.
Well, and in fact, if the Saudi government, which I assume controls all the textbooks in somewhat the same way that states in America control the textbooks, that they have to take it in baby steps. If they try to push too fast, they're likely to get a backlash. Am I right?
Well, yeah, it's not like they're going to all of a sudden start promoting Israel as a trade partner. But, that's why I say let's take it as it comes, because the fact that they are not inciting anti-Semitism is going to have ramifications in the next generation, because the kids have been indoctrinated for generations to hate Jews and hate Israel. And that's what we see, unfortunately, this throughout the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority puts up schools and names them after terrorists. So that Saudi Arabia is now so vastly separating from that kind of attitude is a really big deal.
Now, does the Biden administration get behind this kind of thing and say, okay, this is good, or do they push the other direction? Because I'm also aware that as you make changes, power is both, maybe granted to some groups and threatened among others.
Well, the Biden administration has to get behind this, because the alliance with Israel is on the books. The good relationship with Saudi Arabia is on the books. Bringing these two friendly nations into closer contact is something, of course, they're going to be in favor. Of course, they're going to have to be in favor. The thing that if you want to look at it from a political perspective, former President Trump is absolutely convinced that if he had stayed in office, there would now be 10 nations in the Abraham Accords.
Yeah, he hinted at that on his way out, did he not? I mean, he said,
exactly.
Look, we've got more that are ready to go.
We don't have proof or disproof of that, but one thing is for sure. They completely the Trump administration rewrote the book on how to make peace. They got 4 nations into the Abraham Accords. There's not even been a number 5 so far under this administration.
And why not? Is anybody in the mainstream media even asking, shouldn't we have some more Abraham Accords agreements on the way? Because if you put those questions to people like Kirby over at the State Department, you would think it would put them on the spot. But it's as though the media is willing to say, no, we don't care that there's no more progress seen there.
If I'm going to speculate, I think one thing, there's no question. First of all, you project a message of strength. Trump, by his one-upmanship with Kim Jong-un, is actually, you see that it actually had very positive ramifications. It did not lead to World War III, as the left was promising us. But meanwhile, this Abraham Accords, the pushing forward, it was also accompanied by, wait a minute, okay, here's our offer for a Palestinian Authority for that to actually be a state of Palestine. Take it or leave it on this deal. As you see, the Palestinian Authority left it because their primary goal is to destroy Israel. The other thing they said is, we're not going to give you money until you stop paying terrorists, until you stop this pay to slay. That is the one thing the Biden administration reversed. Think about it. We know that the Palestinian Authority is handing money to terrorists and their families for committing acts of terror against Jews. Restored funding to the Palestinian Authority made the United States into a knowing state sponsor of terror. Is that really the United States that we want to be?
I would hope not. But then I didn't think it was a good idea for Anthony Blinken to go to Beijing and amplify the position we do not support the independence of Taiwan. And I think in many ways, I don't trust the Biden administration at this point. Rabbi, thank you very much. That's Rabbi Yaakov Menken from the Coalition for Jewish Values. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show, so tell Alexa to play The Lars Larson Show.
First, this executive order helps keep firearms out of dangerous hands, as I continue to call on Congress to require background checks for all firearm sales. In the meantime, my executive order directs my Attorney General to take every lawful action possible to move us as close as we can to universal background checks without new legislation.
That, of course, is the big guy, Joe Biden, and this is the Lars Larson Show. And let me tell you something. I'm going to tell you how hypocritical this guy is. He is constantly talking about guns. He is constantly talking about keeping guns out of the hands of criminals. Only now we find out, and we've told you about him before, that Joe Biden's own son, Hunter Biden, is a criminal. He is pleading guilty to tax crimes. A lot of us believe that he is guilty of a whole lot more than that, and he is pleading guilty to a gun crime. And you know what? For the most part, he's getting almost no punishment at all. So you've got dear old dad, the big guy, the head of the Biden crime family, saying, we've got to keep guns out of the hands of bad people and criminals, and we've got to do it through better background checks. Well, guess what? The background check on Hunter Biden did not show what he could have admitted. That was that he was a user of illegal drugs. And if he had signed that form lawfully and legitimately, they wouldn't have sold him a gun. It's exactly the kind of thing that dear old dad is always talking about, because Joe Biden will tell you all day long he wants new limitations on the purchase of guns to keep them out of the hands of criminals. And yet, when it comes to his son, who is a criminal and who illegally bought a gun and illegally possessed a gun, and that gun, by the way, ended up in a trash can opposite a high school in Delaware. And only by the grace of God did that gun stay out of the hands of a kid. Fortunately, it was found by a guy who was trying to collect recyclables to make a few bucks, found the gun, did the right thing, turned it over to the police. But there is more to the story than that. But if you want first-class hypocrisy, look no further than the Biden crime family and the man who today sits in the Oval Office and calls himself President of the United States. Welcome to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you on a Tuesday, and I'm always glad to take your calls at 866-HEY-LARS. And if you happen to be a naysayer, you want to tell me that Hunter Biden really did deserve just a slap on the wrist for what he did, for multiple tax crimes, for a gun crime that was a serious crime, and put a gun in the hands of a criminal, I'd be glad to take that naysayer call at 866-439-5277. You can also email talk@larslarson.com, and you can vote in our Twitter poll. I'll tell you about the Twitter poll in just a moment. But if you want first-class hypocrisy, look no further than the man who heads up the Biden crime family. Joe Biden regularly promises to ban law-abiding Americans, and I'll admit, I have a dog in the fight there. I buy guns, I own guns. But I don't commit crimes like Joe Biden's son committed a crime to buy that gun. This morning, we found out that a felony violation of a gun law by Joe's son Hunter is simply going to be dismissed. He could have been sent to federal prison for as long as 10 years for that crime. He will not be, because his last name is Biden. And that's the only reason he's getting a break. Everybody who buys a gun in America, including yours truly, has to sign a thing called a Federal Form 4473. If you're not familiar with it and you have friends who've ever bought a gun, they know exactly what a 4473 is. It's a piece of paper. It asks you a bunch of questions. It asks you what your race is, whether you're Hispanic or not. It asks you for your name and your social and your address and your date of birth. It also asks you whether or not you're involved in crimes. And specifically, it asks whether or not you're a user of illegal drugs. Well, of course, cocaine, which was Hunter Biden's specialty, is a federally illegal drug. If you lie on the form, right at the bottom where you sign your name, it says if you have said anything untrue on this form and you sign the form, you are committing the written form of perjury. It's called false swearing, and you can go to prison, federal prison, for years. Well, in 2018, Hunter Biden did exactly that. He lied on the form about his crack cocaine smoking, which, according to his own book, was going on at the time, and he illegally bought that gun. His now ex-wife tossed the gun into a trash can across the street from a high school in Delaware. Then the Secret Service went to the gun store and tried to confiscate the paperwork from that gun store. They, even though Hunter Biden was not under Secret Service protection at the time, they were looking out for the big guy, for Joe Biden. Joe Biden, by the way, in 2018 was not president of the United States. Donald Trump was. And yet, for some reason, the Secret Service was out there looking out for the Biden crime family. Now, why do you suppose a corrupt organization like the Secret Service or corrupt organizations like the Department of Justice would do such a thing? Do you know what happened in that case? The owner of the gun store suspected that the Secret Service was trying to cover up for Hunter Biden and, by extension, for Joe Biden. So the owner refused to give the Secret Service the paperwork. Instead, he handed it over to the federal ATF. And then, as I told you, a man hunting for recyclables found the gun and gave it to police. But ever since, even though that's 5 years ago, the FBI and the DOJ, both during the Obama administration, during the Trump administration, and, of course, during the Biden administration, these are thoroughly corrupt agencies that protect the Biden crime family. And they worked overtime to avoid prosecuting the son of Joe. Well, this morning, we found out about the plea deal that's been cut. Hunter Biden gets probation for his tax crimes. He got $1.5 million in income in both 2017 and 2018. He owed hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes. He didn't pay the taxes. Well, he got a plea deal. He gets probation for his tax crimes that could have sent him to prison for years. His gun crime is simply going to be wiped off his record altogether. He doesn't have any consequences, except he has to promise that he won't break the law. And now, of course, in theory, if they put a sentence there and say you only get to have this wiped off if you don't break the law, what do you suppose exactly statistically is the likelihood that Hunter Biden is going to be able to go the next couple of years without breaking the law? But let's go back to his dad. Joe Biden wants to outlaw our legal right to buy guns, and his friends in the government then protect his own progeny from prosecution. If Joe and the Democrat Party did not have double standards, they would have no standards at all. And the fact is, we're being shown right out in front of God and everybody that there is a double standard in this country, that there is one set of laws for which some ordinary Americans go to prison for the crimes they commit. They go to prison for tax crimes. They go to prison for gun crimes. But when it comes to the Joe Biden family, a different standard altogether applies in that case. And just think about that for a moment. And the next time law enforcement or the FBI or the DOJ say you have to do this, it's the law. Say, does the law apply to everybody in the country equally, as I'm guaranteed in the Constitution? Or is it one kind of justice for some and something else for everybody else? Back in a moment, and you're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I understand that public schools have to be run in an orderly way. So in many cases, public schools are allowed to constrain the free speech, not only of teachers, but of the students, if that speech is disruptive to the classroom environment and keeps the kids from learning. I understand that way of going. The problem is that schools now have started cracking down on free speech, not because it's disruptive, but merely because the people who run the public schools are mostly left-wingers, and they don't like the political content of the speech. And a good example of that, a federal judge has ruled the First Amendment does not protect a 12-year-old Liam Morrison's right to express his opinion on a T-shirt. And what did the T-shirt say? It said there are only two genders, male and female. A sentiment I agree with, and I don't think he should have been tagged for that. So I thought we'd call on our friend, the former DA, Josh Markey. Josh, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Lars.
Well, is the federal judge going to be overruled? Let's cut to the chase first.
Yes, he will. Keep in mind that there are hundreds and hundreds of, quote, federal judges, and it's just sort of a quirk of the U.S. legal system that a judge in, let's say, the Southern District of Alabama can make a ruling that could affect schools in Oregon or Alaska. And that's true until the answer is the appropriate Circuit Court of Appeals gets a hold of the case. And that sometimes isn't as fast as it should be. But you know, you can have a judge rule something that makes it the law until another court says it's not. That sounds outrageous to me. And as you say, the case on point still is a case called Tinker versus Des Moines. It's way back from 1968. And essentially what happened is this family of devoted liberals who were opposed to the war in Vietnam sent their kids to schools wearing black armbands. And the school said, you can't do that. It's political speech. We don't
No,
allow.
by the way,
speech.
Josh, this is the one that may have got it came close to getting us into trouble because we had a law school professor who said what it actually said on the armbands. If I remember right, it said "F the war," did it not?
It may have. I think so. And because but what's broken out is that there's not absolute speech available. Teachers and schools are allowed to do certain things. And the question, of course, when does it raise to this level? They're allowed to bar vulgar or sexual speech. They're able to stop disruptive speech. On the other hand, and of course, private schools can do anything they want. But as you say, the real problem is what's happened is the vast majority of schools in the United States are run by public entities. And the first line of decisions are made by school principals. And unfortunately, a great number of them are woke and are now basically laying down a total double standard, saying, well, this kind of speech we've decided is good, and this kind of speech we've decided is bad. This goes at the very heart of the First Amendment. Now, while it's true that public school kids do not enjoy unfettered First Amendment, we're not worried about that so much. We're worried, as you said, about the actions of the government through the school administrators saying, I can get away with this until and unless somebody brings a lawsuit and a federal judge or state judge tells me to do otherwise. And the vast majority of students and their parents neither have the stomach nor the money to go up against a school district.
Well, let me ask you about this, though. In this case, as you point out, you have federal judges all over the country. The liberals were very good during Trump of finding some obscure federal judge in Hawaii who would say almost anything if Donald Trump breathed that it was unconstitutional. But those judges all are supposed to know the law. They're supposed to know the Constitution. In what tortured way could a federal judge find his way to a decision that this T-shirt is allowed to be silenced by a government entity, a public school, because the student says there are only two genders? How in the world can you get to that legally? Understanding that the judge may say, I don't care if I'm overruled, but legally, how could you justify that?
The only way, and this is, people hate lawyers for exactly this reason, and I am one, is that one could argue, I think it's a lousy argument, that, this is disruptive and this is likely to lead to fights. There actually is a case where the wearing of an American flag was deemed to be disruptive in the context of a Cinco de Mayo demonstration, and there are plenty of cases where the Confederate flag has been ruled to be overly disruptive. To answer your question, Lars, I think some of these federal judges, you have pointed out, I think on your show repeatedly, about how Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana has roasted some of these nominees, frankly, of both parties.
Because they don't know the law.
They don't know some of them don't know the law at all. And we're talking about United States District Court judges who, through this very conversation we're having, have incredible power. They can make a ruling, one judge out of 600, that effectively, controls everything that happens in the United States. I will assume that the judges who make these rulings are not doing so maliciously, that they honestly have been indoctrinated to the point where they think that, for example, the T-shirt that you're describing, that there are only two genders, is somehow so violent, so assaultive, that it creeps over into this category. The thing to understand is, because the case law does allow exceptions, the First Amendment protections in public schools, are not absolute.
Well, they're actually not absolute anywhere, are they? Because I've told people time, place, and manner restrictions can be put on free speech. If I want to stand outside of a hospital at 3 a.m. with a bullhorn and wake up all the patients in the hospital, I can be cited for disorderly conduct. And if I say, I have a first,
in most places,
well,
yes,
in most places, but let me ask you this: in some ways, we got a perverse set of incentives, because you would think that most federal judges would say, well, God forbid I'm overruled by the courts, because that's the courts above me saying this guy or this gal was wrong. Except in this case, they may actually wear that as a badge of honor, saying, I hope they say I'm wrong, because that'll show my woke friends just how woke I am, that I'm willing to bust the rules.
This can run, yes, this can run both directions. And the important thing to remember that makes federal judges totally different is that federal judges are appointed for life. And when I say life, I mean they could literally be, and in some cases are, drooling 95-year-olds who need Pampers to get on the bench. And 99% of them are smart enough to go into senior status. There is a case right now in New York where exactly such a federal judge is refusing to step down, and they don't know what to do about it. Now, I'm not suggesting, look, people can have different opinions. I don't share this particular opinion of the judge that made that decision that you're talking about. But it's not that hard to find a federal judge and to shop, we call it forum shop.
That's Josh Markey, the former DA. Hey, what if you could help turn back the clock and help your dog, like my dog, Sir Winston, be like a puppy again, no matter what their age is? And that's why Dr. Marty developed Nature's Blend, because your dog needs a diet full of real cuts of meat, similar to what they'd eat in the wild. Dogs go bonkers for Dr. Marty's Pets Nature's Blend. When given the choice between Nature's Blend and the giant online retailer's #1 bestseller in dry dog food, a study shows 29 out of 30 dogs choose Nature's Blend first. I got to tell you, Sir Winston Churchill, our Bernese Mountain Dog, he loves it. Tori from Tulsa says, my fur baby is so eager to eat it. Other dog foods I've tried give my sweet boy issues with allergies. As soon as we switched over to Dr. Marty's, all those issues went away. Give your dog a food they'll love and help support the youthful energy, healthy skin, easy digestion, and happy full life. For a limited time, claim 54% off Nature's Blend and receive a free pack of premium dog treats from Dr. Marty's Pets. Go to drmartypets.com. That's /pets, drmartypets.com/pets, or text pets to 511-511. That's text pets to 511-511. Study available on request. Data rates may apply. Glad to get your calls. 866-HEY-LARS. You've got the Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'll be glad to get back to your phone calls and emails shortly at 866-HEY-LARS. If you're a naysayer, we put you right to the head of the line at 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. Vote in our Twitter poll. You'll find that at Lars Larson Show on Twitter and at larslarson.com on the web. It's a real pleasure to welcome from the Heritage Foundation our friend Cully Stimson. Ms. Stimson, thanks a lot for taking the time today.
Lars, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
I want to talk about your book in a bit, Rogue Prosecutors, of which you are the co-author along with Zach Smith, How Radical Soros Lawyers Are Destroying America's Communities. But I wanted to start, if you don't mind, because within the last few hours, we've heard that Hunter Biden, the president's son, who will plead guilty to breaking federal laws, both tax laws and gun laws, is going to get off essentially with almost no punishment whatsoever. And I want to get your take on that.
Well, I'm not surprised that there was a wraparound deal at the front end, which means, as a former federal prosecutor, what you do is you get with the defense attorney and you see whether they're going to ward off an indictment. And so here, from what I'm reading, there's a complaint. He's agreed to plead to 2 misdemeanors of tax evasion and then the misdemeanor of failing to be honest on a firearms form, ATF form, because when he was asked whether he has a drug or alcohol problem, he said no, and of course the videos prove otherwise. Now, the judge has to accept the deal, Lars, but I suspect that's been greased with the judge already. So we'll see how this plays out.
I want to ask you about that, though, because, Cully, I'll tell you, I drink an adult beverage now and then. I don't take illegal drugs. He's going to be allowed to plead guilty to misdemeanors, even though he could have been brought up on the tax law. I think it's still a misdemeanor, but on the gun law. I own guns. Every time I fill out a Form 4473, it asks me a bunch of questions. Hunter Biden answered those questions and lied. And right at the bottom of the form, it warns everybody who signs it, including people like me, if you've lied on part of this form and you sign it, you're committing the written version of perjury, which I think they call false swearing, and it's punishable by 5 years in federal prison, and it is a felony. why, in a case like that, would Hunter Biden be allowed to be able to do that when other people actually have gone to prison for not paying their taxes, have gone to prison for lying on that form, and yet we're going to cut the president's ne'er-do-well son a break?
Well, Lars, the problem with you and me is that our last name isn't Biden.
Yeah.
Because I've signed the same form in purchasing my weapons. And I suspect what's happening, and all kidding aside, is that his defense attorney has done a very good job playing up on the name of his client, Biden, with this Justice Department, and setting the last name aside. He said, look, it's obvious this guy has been in and out of drug treatment programs. It's obvious that he didn't want to be honest on the form. This isn't the crime of the century. He wasn't doing it to evade detection. He was just doing it because he was embarrassed. And that's probably the argument he's put forth. And the Biden Justice Department and this U.S. Attorney for the District of Delaware has bought off on it. Now, there's political accountability here, but not much because there's separation of powers issues. And so I suspect this plea deal is going to go through, and that's going to be the end of it.
See, I understand that somebody might make the argument about embarrassment, but the fact is, if you answer yes, I do use illegal drugs, and there are people in America right now, I don't happen to be one of them, who want to use legal marijuana. It's legal in their states. It's not legal at the federal level. And they've asked the ATF recently, and the ATF has said, if you use pot, legal in your state though it may be, it is still illegal federally, and we're not going to sell you the gun. So it wasn't really about embarrassment. It was, if I answer yes on that question, you won't be embarrassed in front of anybody but the gun seller and maybe some faceless bureaucrat of the ATF, but they're not going to sell you the gun if you're honest. And if his dad's point has been, we've got to keep guns out of the hands of criminals, his son is one of those criminals. And the issue isn't embarrassment. The issue is they wouldn't have sold you the gun if you were honest on the form. And I like John Adams, never knew the guy because he was before my time, but he believed we should be a nation of laws where everybody gets equal treatment under the law. This seems like hugely unequal treatment.
It is, and obviously it is. And I'm sure that in the days and weeks to come after the plea deal is accepted and sentences imposed, people will point out numerous cases where people similarly situated were jacked up by the federal government, prosecuted, and got time in prison. But the problem for them is that their last name is not Biden. And this further erodes erodes people's trust in the justice system and contributes to this narrative, which has some teeth, that there's a two-tier system of justice. I mean, you look at the Durham report, right?
Yep.
The Durham report lays bare the rot at the top of the Justice Department and the so-called Russian hoax that was entirely manufactured by the Clinton campaign and Hillary herself. And yet, who paid the price for that? Nobody except Mr. Kleinsmith, who got a slap on the wrist because he filed a false affidavit before the FISA court. But Strzok, Page, and the rest of them are getting paid, I'm sure, a healthy sum to be on other networks to say, nothing to see here, move along. And so this is not going to help the situation. This is going to make things worse. But, of course, it's great for Hunter Biden.
You know, I wish it had gone to trial because the other details, Mr. Stimson, and tell me if you've heard them differently, is that Hunter Biden illegally bought a gun, illegally carried a gun. He wasn't under Secret Service protection because I think he'd voluntarily waived it off because he decided bringing the Secret Service along for his coke binges and his prostitution encounters probably wasn't the best idea. His I guess now ex-wife, Hallie Biden, took his gun and threw it in a trash can across from a Delaware high school where it was retrieved by a guy looking for recyclables. And then the Secret Service, at least according to the gun shop owner, came in and tried to seize the paperwork from the purchase, even though Biden wasn't under Secret Service protection. Hunter Biden was not at the time. So you've got federal agencies, law enforcement agencies that want the rest of us to trust them, who are providing political protection for years under this situation. And it really makes me angry.
Well, it should. It stinks to high heaven. And what I'm going to be watching as a former criminal defense attorney and prosecutor is the following. How much time does the judge hang over this guy's head, if any, and how long is the probation period? Because I think a person like Hunter, who's had a lot of brushes with the law and clearly has substance abuse and other problems, probably will violate his parole or probation. And then what happens? Because if nothing happens then, and they don't revoke him and bring him back, and sentence him to the full course that he could be sentenced to, then it's even more rotten than you can imagine.
Because the system, both at the local level and the federal level, PVs are about as common. Parole violations are very common. People get, as they call it, violated, meaning not that they were violated, but that their parole was revoked because of that. They go back to jail and they go back to prison. And you're suggesting Hunter Biden is almost certain to violate this and almost certain not to get any kind of punishment for it, showing that we've got this, I guess, royal family of the Bidens who get protection in office and out of office.
Yeah, and add the Clintons to that, because, of course, parole or probation is a privilege, not a right. In fact, it's a privilege in lieu of prison or jail. But a lot of people violate the privilege of being out on the streets, and yet very few people, especially in these rogue prosecutor cities, are going to revoke people's probation or parole and sentence them to jail or ask the judge to impose the full sentence. And I suspect Hunter's got a very good assurance by the Justice Department that they're going to not ask for any time whatsoever. And of course, they can't make it a promise about what they would do if they violate his parole, because they won't do that.
Unfortunately. The book that he's written along with Zach Smith is Rogue Prosecutors, How Radical Soros Lawyers Are Destroying America's Communities. It's out in paperback, or will be out in paperback, and I'm anxious to read it myself because I have a lot of concerns about those rogue prosecutors. Glad to get your phone calls and emails at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@LarsLarson.com, and you're listening to The Lars Larson Show.
On Taiwan, I reiterated the long-standing U.S. One China policy. That policy has not changed. It's guided by the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 joint communiques, the 6 assurances. We do not support Taiwan independence. We remain opposed to any unilateral changes to the status quo by either side. We continue to expect the peaceful resolution of cross-strait differences.
Now, I got to talk about what Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State, said, because he does sound a bit like Neville Chamberlain. You know, if we just keep appeasing the Chinese, that we can get them to back down a little bit, because that worked out so well in the lead up to World War II and Britain's entry into that war. But let me go to that in just a moment. First, because I started today by suggesting that today in America, if it wasn't clear before, it's very clear today. We have 2 standards of justice. One is for people who are politically favored, like Hunter Biden, the son of Joe Biden, who ends up committing tax crimes and pleading guilty and getting almost no punishment at all. He also ended up committing gun crimes and, again, got almost no punishment at all. They've effectively wiped that out. And I don't think much of that, because I think that the law ought to apply to everybody equally. And if you say, well, that's naive, that's not going to happen, political celebrities don't get punished, actually they do, and they should. And when we see examples where they're not getting the same kind of justice that the average person would, we should stand up and object to it. So let me take this call from Jim. Hey, Jim, welcome to the program. What's on your mind?
I just went through this whole situation in the last year. I guess it was about a year ago. Some teenage kids, they live in a small town, accused me of pulling a gun on them. I got out of my car and kind of chewed them a little bit because they were parking on some grass out front and some whatever else. At the end of the day, the prosecuting attorney in Cowlitz County took this thing for 8.5 months and ran with it. I have video surveillance on my house that I turned into them voluntarily. Cost me $20,000 in attorney's fees to prove my innocence, when my video system showed my gun on my hip in its holster, never showed it out. The neighbor testified that she never saw the gun out, and she came up as I was chewing these kids' butts out. Excuse me.
Yeah, that's all right.
Pretty loudly.
Ass is a word in the Bible, so don't worry about that. So.
Okay.
Go ahead.
At the end of the day, I'm a law-abiding, everyday citizen. I'm a gun owner. I happen to be an NRA firearms instructor. And I'm around guns, been around guns my whole life. I think they're a great thing, and they're a great tool, and they're a great piece of entertainment. But At the end of the day, these prosecutors, even in conservative counties, are going after conservatives to destroy their ability to defend themselves in any way, shape, or form. During the 8.5 months, they took my guns away. Innocent until proven guilty is no longer a thing. I literally
Well,
went through this.
and also, Jim, it sounds like you know the Constitution. The government is not allowed to take any man or woman's life, liberty, or property without due process and just compensation. They took your property away. You had done nothing wrong. As you point out, you were innocent until proved guilty, and yet I'm sure you got a modicum of due process, but probably not what you would have wanted. But this is the kind of double standard, and it does two things. Number one, Jim, from my point of view, it says to you there is a protected class in America, and they get special favors. You join Antifa and you burn a building, you don't get charged. You're a conservative and you do anything of the kind, and you do get charged. That's a kind of standard we can't tolerate because it erodes everybody's respect for the law. And let's face it, most of the people in this country obey the law because they understand I'm held to the law, you're held to the law. When you start telling them with blatant examples like Hunter Biden, not all will be held to the law equally, then you say, then why should I follow it if you don't have to follow it? And that's not an unreasonable position.
To this day, I still follow the law. I went through the process. What happened is, in addition to all of this, the police came to my house at 11:30 at night, 8 deep with AR-15s out, and raided my home like I was a third-class citizen from another country. On top of this, when the trial was finished, 1 hour of deliberation over lunch, at lunchtime, a jury of 12 unanimously found me not guilty. They wanted to continue to persist this. The prosecuting attorney held on to my ability to have my concealed carry reinstated, and he kept my gun that they took into evidence, my carry gun, and he kept it for an extra 45 days after I was found not guilty because he just failed to turn in the paperwork. I just want people to be aware of what's truly happening out there and the fact that there's no possible way that if a cop had come and just had a conversation with me and looked at my film on my DVR that records things in front of my home, they would have been no way, shape, or form figured out that these teenage kids had lied and created a story because I told them I was going to call their parents.
And by the way, let me ask you something. You know that if you lie in reporting a crime, that in itself is a crime in every one of the states. Different states have different statutes, but for the most part, if you call the police and you report a crime and it turns out you were lying, not mistaken. You know, if you call and say, hey, I think there's somebody in the bushes outside my house, and it turns out there's nobody, that's not. But if you call and you say, and I've seen cases like this where somebody wants the police to come fast, so they say there's a guy robbing the 7-Eleven next door, and he's got a gun. If you lie to the police, you should be prosecuted for that because it's a crime. And there's a reason it's a crime, because you give false information, people can end up getting shot to death because of false information. So those kids are those kids being prosecuted?
What's that?
Are those kids being prosecuted for lying to the police?
Absolutely not. In fact, one of their family members told me not too long ago, in the last couple of weeks, that I got off, I got lucky. So they're convinced that their little teenage kids, I say teenagers, they were 18 and 19, 19 and 20, in that vicinity. Technically should be considered grown men, but absolutely not. They are not prosecuting them. And in order for me to recover any of my costs incurred, which were, and I can't describe to you the stress that my family went through. I own a small town, and I have 2 little boys and my wife, and they all depend on me for my income. My wife's a stay-at-home mom. We homeschool our kids. And we were just in that situation where, I got to be honest with you, after they found me not guilty on a Friday afternoon, I spent the next 3 days sitting doing nothing.
Decompressing. I can imagine, Jim. I can well imagine. Thank you for the call. I do want to say this about Anthony Blinken going to Beijing on behalf of China Joe Biden, a president who I think is bought and paid for by the Chinese Communist Party that runs the dictatorship we know as mainland China. He goes there and he reiterates that we don't consider Taiwan to be an independent country. I just want you to remember that about 3 years ago, China created a virus in their military labs. They did it with some American taxpayer money. The virus got out of their labs. It infected China. Our own State Department at the time said China could have contained this virus. They chose not to do it. And you're listening to The Lars Larson Show.